All right, we're going to return now to ISIS and some possible options for perhaps stopping that group. For that, let's bring in Edward Djerejian, who is the founding director of the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, also a former U.S. ambassador to both Israel and Syria. Some crucial experience in the region. Joins us now from our Washington studio. Ambassador, thanks so much for being with us. Let's start with this. Airstrikes having some impact in Iraq, but by most accounts, that's not going to be enough big picture. What do you think needs to be done to defeat ISIS?
Well, first, Michael, I think that we need to coordinate and elaborate, not alone, but the U.S. should take the lead, a coherent, comprehensive, strategic approach toward the ISIS threat. But it's beyond ISIS. It's the threat of Islamic radicalism throughout the Middle East. And so I think we have to think in terms of short-term policies and long-term policies. Short-term, as you mentioned, these airstrikes have been relatively effective, and I think we need to get more coordinated military action to stem the advance of ISIS, especially in Iraq. But in the longer term, I think it's critical for the American public to understand that this struggle is really a struggle within the Muslim world for the hearts and minds of the Muslim people, between the forces of moderation and the forces of extremism. In the first instance, this is their major challenge. Secondarily, it's our challenge because of the threat of terrorism that this and other groups pose.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and it's also important in terms of context to remember that 99% of Muslims are not these sorts of guys. They're not these sorts of radicals. But attacking it at its root is really the issue. I'm curious in your take here on what's happened in Iraq in terms of ISIS advances, changing the dynamic in Syria when it comes to the West dealing with Bashar al-Assad. Here they are with a common enemy.
Right, and what is this danger of ISIS has provided, as you said, Michael, a common enemy to basically strange bedfellows in terms of the United States. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, other Arab countries and Muslim countries. ISIS poses a major threat because for ISIS, the near enemy are the existing governments in the Muslim world that have to be overthrown so that ISIS can establish its wider caliphate. The far enemy is the United States, the Europeans, and the outsiders. So fundamentally, what is important, I believe, is for the United States and for the President to lead a very broad-based coalition to take advantage of this common threat and bring in all the parties that are opposed to ISIS to confront it and hopefully eventually destroy it.
As you say, I mean, strange bedfellows indeed. Remarkable convergence of regional interest, if you like. I mean, we had what would be an unthinkable thing happen the other day when you had the Iranians talking to the Saudis about ISIS and how to defeat them. And a lot of that is, as you point out, self-interest, self-preservation for those nations who are all part of the greater desired caliphate. Do you see a cooperation perhaps in the future between Bashar al-Assad and some of those players, including the U.S.?
Well, Bashar al-Assad is opposed, obviously, to ISIS, but let's be clear. Bashar al-Assad helped create ISIS and used ISIS against the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian opposition to him. In my eyes, Bashar al-Assad is primarily responsible for creating this horrible political vacuum in Syria that has cost so many lives and gave a group like ISIS the opportunity to establish a foothold in Syria and spread further into Iraq and virtually destroy the Iraq-Syrian border. So I am not an advocate of going into a partnership with Bashar al-Assad because of what he represents, but for his own interests, he would have an interest in confronting ISIS militarily. But that's why this broad coalition can include, as I said, some very interesting and strange bedfellows.
It may be a situation where it might turn out to be unrealistic not to involve him in some sort of overall policy in that regional cross-border situation, which brings me to my next question. And you talked before about going to the heart of this and dealing with the extremism at its roots, but also one of the things to deal with at its roots is the disenfranchisement of Sunnis and their subsequent tolerance of ISIS. You know, having spent so much time in Iraq myself, the one thing that I will take away from the tribes is they are fiercely independent. They don't like the ISIS style of governance. However, they joined forces against a common enemy, and that was a government that ostracized them. Can you see that turning around in a 2006-2007 sense that we saw in Anbar with the tribes there rising against Al-Qaeda?
Yes, I can, Michael. I can see this, but it's going to take leadership, first of all, on our part in the United States, but even more importantly, with the key countries in the Middle East, the ones we mentioned, and because the threat is to each one of them. And so therefore, the issue that you raised, the humiliation of the Sunnis, their suppression, especially by Maliki in Iraq, all of these are factors that would bring them to a point whereby they could join into a coalition of the willing that is led by the countries in the region and the United States and our European allies. But this is going to have to take a new strategy. It has to be elaborated, and it's not only military. It also has to address what you mentioned, the resentment, the causes of alienation on the part of these various groups.
Yeah, and there's an urgency involved here too. You know, the one thing that I fear is that it might at some point get too late in terms of getting the Sunnis back on side, and whether ISIS can frame what the US is doing as being anti-Sunni by helping the Shiites and so on. The urgency is key here, though, isn't it? Something's got to happen pretty soon, or it's going to be too late.
Well, the urgency is the short term, taking whatever coordinated military actions we can to stem the expansion of ISIS. But the other factor is that this is a long-term struggle. We must not forget that. This may even be a generational struggle. I think this is a struggle that's going to go beyond this administration. You know, Michael, the so-called war on poverty, the war on drugs, never ended in victory. The war on terror has not ended in victory. This is a long-term generational struggle, and we have to become realistic, especially in the United States, in elaborating a strategy that has a military, intelligence, national security, socioeconomic, political attributes to it. This is going to take some serious strategic thinking, akin to, you know, one of those periods in our history after World War II, when we elaborated some very brilliant foreign policy approaches.
I have to agree with you on that. A matter of attacking causes, as you point out, and not just endlessly attacking symptoms. I have to leave it there. Edward Djerejian, founding director of the Baker Institute Public Policy at Rice University, former ambassador to Syria. Really appreciate your perspective on all of this. Fascinating.
Thank you.